"Mom, the rent's due. Wire it fast." Her voice came through the phone like a blade, sharp and unceremonious. No hello, no how are you, just those 5 words delivered with the mechanical chill of a bank notice. I held the phone tighter, the grooves on the receiver digging into my palm like minor punishments I somehow deserved. My kitchen clock ticked behind me, loud in the silence, marking time I never return. I stood at the window, watching the late November snow fall in Harrison Falls, our sleepy Minnesota town with its postcard-perfect winters and cold shoulders. Ed and I built a life in a 2-bedroomed Craftsman, tucked between pine trees and frozen sidewalks in the city, where I raised Daniel. That house still stood, only now it was filled with the lives of my son and his wife Samantha, lives I bankrolled piece by. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the worn checkbook on the counter beside me. I had already transferred $400 last week, for groceries or so I was told. The week before that, it was urgent dental work. And before that, car trouble. The emergencies came like clockwork, just before a holiday and just before my small Social Security check hit. I could hear movement from the other end of the line. Samantha's voice in the background, laughing, probably watching a show, or maybe scrolling through sales on her phone. And then, like clockwork again, Daniel's voice, low, unsure. "Mom, you there?" "I'm here," I said, quiet like a wind-up toy running out of tension. "I'll see what I can do." I hung up before they could ask for more. Before I could cave in and apologize for not having enough this month, I stared at the tea kettle I hadn't used in days, my reflection warped in its curved metal side. My hands reached for it anyway, muscle memory stronger than shame. Water boiled as my mind wandered, but that was before. Now I sat alone with a lukewarm mug and a notebook, my ledger of sacrifice, page after page of handwritten transfers, all labeled carefully with dates and amounts, grocery bills, car insurance, rent shortfalls, holiday gifts, unpaid credit card minimums, my contributions to their freedom. $33,400 drawn steadily from my pension and the meager savings Ed left behind. Once, I told myself it was love, that parents give and keep sharing. But lately, I haven't been so sure what this is anymore. A contract? A bribe for a connection? Last month, I sent Samantha $200 after she called sobbing that their electricity might be shut off. The next day, she posted a photo on Instagram, her smiling over martinis at a rooftop bar in St. Paul, captioned, "Living our best life." Not even a tag. I flipped to a blank page in my notebook. My pen hovered over the paper, trembling. Then I wrote it down anyway. Transfer number 51, $400, rent. The pen scraped like it had judgment in its ink. As I closed the notebook, the room felt smaller, colder. My eyes flicked to the family photo above the fireplace. Ed's arm wrapped around me, Daniel just 6, missing a front tooth, his hand gripping mine like I was the safest place on earth. Where had that boy gone? I left the mug untouched and wandered down the hallway, past the linen closet with the broken hinge, past the framed art Daniel once made in 5th grade, paper stars glued to black construction paper, labeled, "To the best mom in the galaxy." The tape was yellowed, curling at the edges. I sat at the edge of the bed in the guest room. My room now. The floral comforter still smelled faintly of lavender dryer sheets. I reached under the bed and pulled out a shoebox. Inside were birthday cards, old Polaroids, and one envelope I hadn't opened. A card from last Mother's Day, addressed in Samantha's handwriting, to Margaret. I opened it finally. The inside was blank, not a word, just a signature, Sam and Daniel. It took more strength to close that envelope than to lift a hospital patient during my nursing days. The phone buzzed again, this time a text. Samantha, "Hey, can you send it before 5? We don't want to get a late fee." That was it. I looked around the room, at the neat corners and the worn rug Ed had picked out 20 years ago. Everything here had a story, a fingerprint, a purpose. I no longer knew if I had one. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off the lights and walked toward the kitchen again, just in time to hear the wind howl outside, rattling the old windows. My hands found the mug of now cold tea. The bitterness didn't surprise me anymore. From the living room, my landline rang again, same tone, same timing. I let it ring until it stopped. Then the voicemail clicked on, and through the crackling speaker, Samantha's voice spilled into the room, cheerful but firm. "You know, Mom, you won't need that house much longer anyway. She's ancient. When she's in a home, we flip the house." I wasn't meant to hear it, but I did. It happened on a late afternoon Tuesday, when the light outside had turned the hallway a bruised gold. I'd left the front door unlocked, old habit from when Daniel was young and would barrel in after baseball practice, slamming it behind him, breathless with joy and dust. Now that same door creaked open quietly, followed by the sound of boots thudding on hardwood. I stayed in the kitchen, rinsing out a teacup, not wanting to interrupt whatever brief visit this might be. Maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me with something warm, a question, a hug. Instead, I heard their voices drift down the hall like smoke under a door. "I'm telling you, once she's in assisted living," Samantha said, "we can flip it. 2-bedroom Craftsman in Harrison Falls. Zillow says it's gold." "And if she doesn't go?" Daniel asked. His voice wasn't defiant, just soft, tired. "She's 70, Dan. She's already alone. This place is too much for her. We just help nudge things along." I couldn't move. The sponge in my hand dropped into the sink with a dull slap. My knuckles gripped the counter's edge so hard I could feel my pulse there. I leaned closer toward the hallway, past the corner of the fridge, where the air turned colder. "She won't even feel it," Samantha continued. "You talk to her. She trusts you." And then Daniel, my boy, the one I carried through flu seasons and night terrors. "Yeah, I'll handle it." The world narrowed. My knees buckled slightly, but I steadied myself, backing away like I'd touched fire. That voice, his voice, hadn't hesitated, not once. I stepped back toward the wall, and something bumped against my hip. The frame. Ed's photo. I must have nudged it. It hit the floor face first with a crack. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut clean. No one in the hallway noticed. They laughed, lightly, about something else I didn't catch. The kind of laugh people use when they believe they're already standing in the winner's circle. I didn't confront them. I didn't march in and shout. I just knelt quietly and picked up the photo. The glass had split into 3 sharp lines across Ed's smiling face. I didn't bleed, but something inside me did. By the time they walked into the kitchen, Daniel was wearing that half smile of guilt, and Samantha was wearing her faux chipper tone. I had already wiped the frame, tucked it away, and forced my smile into place. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said. "Didn't want to surprise you." Too late. They stayed for 15 minutes, long enough to raid the fridge, comment on the draft in the hallway, and mention a possible trip to Denver that would cost extra this month. I nodded, smiled, bit my tongue so hard it felt like punishment. When they left, Samantha gave me a side hug. Daniel barely looked up from his phone. When the door closed, I dropped the smile like a rotten peach. That night, I sat at the small writing desk by the window. I lit a single lamp, pulled my old leather journal from the drawer. My hands moved on instinct, nurse muscle memory, steady and clean. I documented the visit like I would a patient note. Tuesday, 4:45 p.m. Overheard plans to flip the house. Confirmed collusion. No remorse. Daniel compliant. Samantha's directive. Emotional impact. Severe. I paused, then underlined severe 3 times. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. Thick flakes dancing under the porch light, soft as lies. I thought of calling Ellen, my older sister, but something about saying it aloud felt unbearable. I didn't want her pity, not yet. Instead, I did something I hadn't in years. I pulled out the manila folder from under my mattress, the one Ed told me to keep safe. Inside were the documents: itemized bank transfers, printed emails, signed IOUs, some written on casual notepads, others more formal, all signed by Daniel and Samantha during earlier days when the money still came with a handshake and "we'll pay you back promptly." They never imagined I'd keep them. Ed always said, "Just in case the heart forgets, let paper remember." The old lawyer in town, Mr. Halverson, had helped us set it up when Ed got sick. "Your kindness deserves boundaries," he told me. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now, I saw it for what it was: a map out of a maze I hadn't even known I'd entered. I closed the folder gently, hands trembling not from age, but from anger held too long. Later that evening, I called Ellen. I tried to keep my voice level, but the crack came quick. "I heard them," I said, "talking about the house. Like I'm already gone." She was silent momentarily, then sighed the sigh only older sisters know how to deliver. I stared out the window long after we hung up. The porch light flickered. A squirrel darted through the snow, desperate for warmth. I heard a memory in the stillness. Daniel at 10, whispering through a fever, "You're the best, Mom. I'll take care of you one day." That promise had vanished. I rose, returned to my desk, and opened the journal again. The page under my last entry was still blank. I flipped to the end, where only one word stood alone: enough. Then I reached into the drawer and pulled out the manila folder, laying it flat on the table. The documents inside looked sharper tonight. More than paper, they were my line in the snow. And I whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of Ed, and to the little boy I used to know. "You flipped first, Daniel. I just finally noticed. They think I'm an old fool, but I have every receipt, every signature. Let them come." I said it out loud, though no one was around to hear me but the refrigerator and the wind scraping frost against the kitchen window. There was something about hearing it spoken, like proof that the fire inside me hadn't gone out completely. I brought the folder to the table, thick with paper, weighty like a loaded gun, if paper could carry that kind of violence. Years of transfers, IOUs signed, scribbled notes from Daniel, texts printed from Samantha's pleading messages. At the time, I told myself I was just staying organized, but deep down, I think I knew. Ed would have known. Outside, Harrison Falls was wrapped in another heavy snow. The roads were coated in silence, and so was the house except for the ticking of the clock and the sound of my breath. This was no longer just about disappointment. This was preparation. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to file, document, move like the nurses do when the emergency is quiet but real. I spent the next few hours doing what I hadn't done in years, organizing like a woman who expected company. I cleared the desk in the guest room, brought in my laptop, and opened a spreadsheet. One column for dates, one for amounts, one for the purpose they claimed, one for the truth I suspected. The total climbed with each entry, line by line, betrayal by betrayal. $18,000 in rent aid, though the mortgage was long paid off. $7,000 in groceries, when I had barely touched anything beyond canned soup and crackers for weeks. $2,500 for their car note, though I remembered Samantha buying a newer model after that call. The numbers didn't just add up, they accused. Halfway through the process, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Samantha. "Samantha, just making sure the $400 went through. Can't afford a late fee this time." No greeting, no warmth, just the same script, the same emoji that once felt casual and now stung like a slap. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my journal, flipped to the last entry. Transfer number 52, $400, rent. I crossed it out with a thick black line. In the afternoon, I took the manila folder, the journal, and the spreadsheet I'd printed, and I drove. The first real drive I'd taken in weeks. The Honda sputtered in the cold, but didn't protest. The roads were slick, salt-streaked, and mostly empty. I pulled into the senior center parking lot and sat in the car for a full minute, deep breathing. Inside, the hum of voices and the clink of coffee mugs welcomed me. Betty spotted me first. Her short gray curls bounced as she waved me over with her mug. "Margaret, we thought you had hibernated on us." "I've been sorting," I said. Tom, sitting beside her in his usual flannel, raised an eyebrow. "Sorting what?" I looked at them. The coffee-stained table, the chairs that wobbled. No one had touched the half-finished jigsaw puzzle in a week. "My life," I said. That was all it took. Betty shifted in her seat and straightened her back. Tom leaned in. They knew the weight behind a sentence like that. We all did. I told them. Not everything, just enough. The money, the pressure, the house talk. I didn't cry. I didn't whisper. I just laid it out like a list of symptoms. When I finished, Betty reached across and took my hand. "You're not alone, honey. Not anymore." Tom leaned back. "That's elder abuse, plain and simple." I gave a bitter chuckle. They'd never see it that way. To them, I'm just doing what mothers do. "Anymore," Betty said. "Not if you're standing up." I left the folder with them, told them to read it if they wanted, or burn it. Either way, I wasn't carrying it by myself anymore. Later that evening, I sat by the window again, the snow now a soft curtain beyond the glass. My fingers ached from typing and writing, but my chest felt lighter. I was no longer invisible. I had a voice, and it had documents to back it up. The landline rang, slicing the quiet. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me reach for it. "Margaret Lane?" the voice said. A man's voice, familiar but aged. "Yes. It's Frank. Frank Halverson. I don't know if you remember." "Of course I remember you," I said. My voice cracked a little. "Ed's lawyer, the one who helped us when the cancer came too fast." Frank cleared his throat. "Ed always said you were sharper than us. Let's make them remember that." "You hid those papers? That's fraud, Mom." Samantha's voice wasn't shaken. It was sharp, like a blade honed for war. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the den, cordless phone in one hand, fingers white around the plastic. Her voice vibrated through the line, crisp and furious. Across the room, the TV hummed quietly with the evening news, but the words barely reached me. "You can't just drop this on us," she hissed. "We have a baby on the way." The lie landed with the same chill as the wind outside. My gaze drifted to the snow piling on the porch railing. There hadn't been a word about a pregnancy before today. No scan photos, no subtle hints. Just this, dropped, like a last-minute bid in a crooked game. "I spoke with your OB clinic," I said calmly. "They have no record of you." Dead silence. Then a low laugh, mocking. "You're spying on me now?" "I'm protecting myself," I replied. She went quiet again. I could hear Daniel's murmur in the background, asking something. Then a thud, a door slamming. She was alone now. "You're going to destroy this family," she said, voice lower, steadier, more dangerous. "You think people won't talk? You think your friends at that dusty little center won't look at you differently when they know you're dragging your son to court?" I took a breath. Let them talk. Let the truth breathe for once. I didn't wait for her next word. I hung up and placed the phone gently on the charging base. My hand lingered there, slightly shaking, before I turned and entered the den. The fireplace hadn't been used in months, but tonight I lit it. The smell of burning kindling rose up like an old memory. I sat on the couch with the folder in my lap, its edges warm in the fire's glow. I wasn't bluffing. Not anymore. The next morning, I met Frank at his downtown office, a converted dental clinic between a thrift store and a shuttered movie theater. He looked older than I remembered, more white in the beard, more slope in the shoulders, but his posture straightened when he opened the folder I'd brought. The papers whispered as he flipped through them, each a testament to what I had endured in silence. "You kept everything," he muttered. "Ed would have wanted me too," I said. He nodded slowly. This isn't just strong. I didn't smile. I wasn't here for victory. I was here for justice. Back home that afternoon, I was met with a yellow envelope taped to my front door, my name scrawled in Sharpie. Inside was a formal notice, Daniel and Samantha Lane v. Margaret Lane. They were suing me. The claim? Concealment of assets and emotional distress. I read the phrase twice, then again. It almost made me laugh. Almost. I placed the notice on the dining table beside my Christmas centerpiece, which is still untouched from last year. A ceramic angel, dust settled on her wings. Later, at the senior center, I walked into a buzzing room. Word traveled faster than the mail in Harrison Falls. Betty stood near the coffee pot, hands on her hips. "Well," she said, "it's out now." I nodded. I won't hide from it. Tom gave a low whistle. "They're calling you greedy on Facebook, accusing you of disowning your only son." "I didn't disown him," I said. "He left me behind a long time ago. I just finally noticed." The room fell silent, not in judgment, but in solidarity. We'd all seen it, different names and faces, but the same betrayal. The slow erosion of trust, the bending of love into obligation. I was just the one who said it out loud. Betty stepped forward. "We're with you." Tom nodded. "All the way." 2 nights later, Samantha called again. This time there was no greeting, no small talk. "You can't win," she said flatly. "We have receipts too. Texts, gifts, birthday cards you signed without conditions. We'll spin this, Margaret. You'll come out looking like a bitter old woman who forgot how to be a mother." I paused, letting her words hang in the air. Then I replied slowly and steadily, "If being a mother means funding your lies, then maybe I forgot. Or maybe I finally remembered who I was before you told me who I had to be." There was no response. The line went dead. I stood in my hallway for a while, eyes tracing the shadow of the staircase where Daniel once sat as a boy on Christmas morning, too excited to wait for sunrise. I remembered how he'd gripped my hand before opening presents, his eyes wide with wonder. And then I remembered the eyes that wouldn't meet mine last week, full of avoidance, complicity, cowardice. I lit the hallway lamp and returned to the den. The fire had gone out. I didn't restart it. I didn't need warmth from flames anymore. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Frank. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's go all in." "She's lying. We were promised the house." Samantha's voice echoed across the courtroom like a hammer to glass. Her cheeks were flushed, fists clenched just above the table. Next to her, Daniel sat stiff, eyes fixed on the floor, hands folded too tightly to be at ease. I watched them both from across the aisle, heart steady, back straight. This wasn't the first time I'd been in a room full of tension. Hospitals prepared me well for that, but nothing could have prepared me for the ache of seeing your own child look past you, as if you were no longer part of their origin story. The judge didn't flinch. A woman in her 60s, with thick glasses and a gray bun. She'd seen it all before. She adjusted her papers, gave Samantha a brief look, then turned to Frank. "Counselor," she said, "please proceed." Frank stood slowly. No theatrics, no fancy suit, just calm confidence that made the air shift around him. He opened my folder, now thick with printed bank records, signed IOUs, and a chronological log of my generosity. "Your Honor," he said, "we're not here today because of love gone sour. We're here because of documented financial abuse, carefully recorded over 4 years. Loans, not gifts, signed and itemized." He handed the documents to the clerk. The judge flipped through the pages, her brows narrowing slightly. "We have $33,400 in signed agreements," Frank continued. "Not verbal promises, not assumptions. Agreements, witnessed by text, email, and, in some cases, hand-signed acknowledgement." Across the room, Samantha scoffed, loud enough to draw a glance. Daniel still hadn't looked up. I studied his face, trying to read between the lines, hoping foolishly that guilt might crack through, but his eyes stayed glued to the floor like something shameful lived there. Frank strolled to the evidence screen. "And then there's this recording," he said. He pressed play. The room filled with the hiss of speakers and a familiar voice, laced with disdain. "Jack, your mom's ancient. When she's out, we flip the house." A pause. "She won't need it when tucked in a nursing home. I already checked Zillow." Gasps broke out in the back row, small, shocked murmurs. Betty was there, Tom, half the senior center. Their presence bolstered me, but I didn't turn to look. I kept my eyes on Samantha, who went pale as marble. "Recording was captured by Ms. Richter in her own home," Frank said. "Without entrapment, without coercion, just the truth, spoken when they thought no one was listening." The judge turned to the opposing attorney, a young man trying to smooth his tie and dignity simultaneously. He had no rebuttal ready, no strong defense, just the silence of a case unraveling. Samantha stood abruptly. "That's edited. That's not fair." She twisted everything. The judge raised her hand calmly. "Sit down, Mrs. Lane." Samantha froze, then sank into her chair, seething. Frank returned to his seat. "We rest, Your Honor." The judge called a short recess. I stepped into the hallway, hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline had dropped. Betty came over, gripping my hand with strength I didn't know she had. "We heard it all," she said. "You were right not to shout. Let the truth do the yelling." I nodded, words caught in my throat. Across the hall, Daniel leaned against the wall alone, his eyes flicking toward me for just a second, then away again. He didn't speak. And that, I realized, hurt more than any insult ever could. Back in the courtroom, we took our seats. The judge shuffled her notes, took a breath, and looked at each of us in turn. "This court finds that the funds transferred from Ms. Richter to the plaintiffs were in fact structured loans, not gifts, and are to be repaid in full," she said. "The property at 422 Maple Hollow Lane remains legally owned by Ms. Margaret Richter, without encumbrance or claim." Samantha gasped. Daniel dropped his head into his hands. Case closed. The gavel came down. A soft thud, but it might as well have been a thunderclap. I stood slowly. My legs were steady, my chest was not. There was no cheering, no applause, just silence, final and honest. I turned toward the doors. As I did, I felt Daniel's eyes on me. I didn't stop. He looked at me one last time, but I had already turned away. "So, what now?" Betty's question floated across the senior center's main hall, over the quiet clink of coffee mugs and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. I looked up from the donation box I was organizing, filled with printouts, brochures, and laminated signs that read, "Guard your legacy, protecting what you've built." I smiled, slow and steady. Now I live. It had been 3 weeks since the verdict. The snow had begun to melt along the sidewalks of Harrison Falls, leaving slush in its wake. The air still held a bite, but there was something softer about it now, like spring was whispering at the edges of winter's hold. Back at home, I'd packed most of my things. The house was sold within 8 days. Apparently Samantha was right. Zillah had known what it was talking about. But the irony didn't sting anymore. I'd taken the check, opened a new account in my name only, and wired a portion straight into an IRA fund. The rest would be saved for something else, something freer. Daniel hadn't reached out. There were no apologies, no explanation. I didn't expect one. I wasn't sure I wanted one. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't have to mean restoration. It could just mean release. The senior center had become my second home. We'd cleared out a storage closet and turned it into a resource nook, filled with guides on wills, digital fraud, and medical proxies. I taught a workshop every Thursday, Financial Boundaries for the Quiet Generous. The room was always full. I never used my own story as a sales pitch, but everyone knew One woman, Darlene, pulled me aside after a session. 72, a former elementary school teacher, always had her pearls tight around her neck. "My daughter's boyfriend took over our garage," she whispered. "He said he needed it for his business. I haven't parked in my own home since September." I handed her a clipboard and said, "Let's write down everything. That's where it starts." "I received a letter last week, handwritten, no return address. You embarrassed us. I hope you're happy." It was unsigned, but the handwriting was Samantha's. I folded it once and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, beside a blank envelope I'd been meaning to send for years. I wrote a letter to Daniel after Ed died. I never sent it. Maybe I never will. Some silences don't beg to be filled. This morning, I walked through the house one last time. My footsteps echoed in the emptier spaces. The guest room was bare, the walls stripped of their frames. On the kitchen table, I left behind a jar of homemade apple preserves, my mother's recipe, and a note scribbled on a card. "For whoever lives here next, may your family cherish more than just square footage." I locked the door for the last time and didn't look back. Now, as I stood beside the whiteboard at the senior center, I wrote the title for next week's session in bright green marker. Trust Entitlement, Redefining Love as Adults. The room clapped. Tom raised his coffee like a toast. Betty winked from the second row. Across from me, a new face, Lucille, 81, full of fire, smiled and tapped her pen like she couldn't wait to take notes. That evening, I walked the lake path behind the center. The air smelled of thawed earth and pine. My boots left small imprints in the muddy snow. Birds called from the trees again. Not loud, just enough. I paused at the bench Ed and I used to sit on. The brass plaque still read, "In loving memory of Edward Lane, builder of safe places." My gloved fingers brushed the edge. "You'd laugh at how long it took me to realize I was worth saving too," I whispered. Back at home, or what was left of it, I zipped the final suitcase. The plane ticket was tucked in my coat pocket. Paris, the trip Ed had once promised, the one I kept putting off. A note from Betty on the fridge was written on a sticky note with a cartoon bear. "Don't forget to live loud. You've earned it." The cab arrived early. As we pulled away from the curb, the center's windows glowed with the soft orange of evening. I saw Tom holding a box of fresh printouts and Lucille hanging the week's new flyers. Betty waved from the sidewalk, hands in the air, hair wrapped in a pink scarf that flapped like a banner. They weren't waving goodbye. They were waving me forward. On the plane, I settled by the window. The lights of Harrison Falls faded beneath us, familiar patterns giving way to darkness and clouds. I closed my eyes. I thought about every woman in that center. Every story whispered behind coffee mugs. Every ledger of pain turned into testimony. I wasn't alone in what I'd lost, but I was learning how to walk again, this time not as someone's mother or wife, just me. Margaret Lane. It took losing everything to find myself. And now, I finally get to live for me. And in that silence, I realized something deeper. Survival is not the end of the story. It is the prologue to self-respect. For years, I thought my worth depended on how much I gave away, how much I endured. But freedom showed me that dignity begins where fear ends. Betrayal taught me the sharp edge of love without boundaries, yet courage revealed the quiet power of saying enough. I learned honor is not won in a courtroom. It is kept in the daily act of choosing oneself over silence. A mother can give life, but she is not required to give her whole life away. A house can be sold, but integrity must be guarded like breath. I carried the weight of broken promises, but also had proof, which took me back to my name. Love without respect is not love, it is leverage. And respect, once demanded, changes the shape of every room you enter. The memory of loss will never vanish, but neither will the strength that rose from it. I am not only free, I am seen, whole, and awake. So if you are listening and have ever traded your peace for the illusion of family harmony, remember that you deserve boundaries that keep you safe. You deserve to hold your head high, even if others look away. And you deserve to live a life that belongs to you, not to their expectations. Because in the end, identity is not defined by what others take from us. It is written by what we refuse to surrender. Have you ever stood in that place, torn between love and self-preservation? Have you ever had to choose your dignity over someone else's comfort? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might become the light for another soul still walking in shadows. And if this tale touched you, press the number 1 and subscribe to Auntie Tales so you will never miss the story of courage, betrayal, and redemption.